Taylor Swift and Hidetaka Miyazaki have one really major thing in common. They were never meant to become as big as they have become. Taylor is in this position now where she is the biggest musician in the world. Absolutely anything she does or makes will be endlessly scrutinized, dissected, discussed, and her core fan base is absolutely enormous and rabid in their consumption and support of anything she puts out. Similarly, Miyazaki and FromSoftware have found the most extraordinary and improbable success with their Souls games and others of that ilk, culminating in the enormous phenomenon of Elden Ring. And so when the Elden Ring DLC just came out, almost every big streamer on the internet had to play it. Everybody had to play it, everybody had to discuss it, and it was awaited and greeted by similarly feverish enthusiasm. And so I think both Taylor and Miyazaki and FromSoftware now operate under a burden of expectation that they cannot sustain. There is an endless hunger for more that they are expected to feed, and that kind of situation is always bad for a creator. It results in creators putting out massive products without finely differentiated parts that don't have the personal flavor and meticulous care for detail that their earlier output had. What does Tortured Poets Department have in common with Elden Ring and the Elden Ring DLC? They're gigantic. They're gigantic, and they're a little bit empty. The Taylor Swift-Jack Antonoff alliance was already pretty much exhausted before she put out this album, and this album, while it does have some great songs on it, does not have the consistency and integration that some of her earlier work had. And similarly, Shadow of the Erdtree has some amazing stuff, and it has some incredible boss fights, but there's also a lot of filler in a world, this is something it has in common with the base game even, that is often repetitive and empty, in the same way that Taylor's new songs often feel like something you've heard before and better from her. And without that overwhelming hunger for more from the fans out there, I don't think either of them would have embarked on projects that needed to be so large, or would ever have signed off on something of such uneven quality. As an artist, you cannot be motivated by what other people want. You have to be motivated by what you want. And you can feel this very powerfully in, say, the original Dark Souls, which is a weird game made by weird people that had a very distinctive vision. Or in Taylor's Red, which was a cross-genre album breaking into the pop world that was nevertheless thoroughly suffused with her highly individual voice. A voice that was individual through her artistry, and not through the mere fact that it was hers. And in both cases, I think these creators caught on and achieved this kind of wildfire popularity for the wrong reasons. FromSoftware games became so big largely through this cult of difficulty that grew up around them, so that it was all about the challenge of the games and putting people through it, and the entertainment of watching people die to a boss over and over and over again. And Taylor became a phenomenon of that scale in large part through force of personality. And this is obvious enough when you see how a lot of Swifties talk, which is very much taking the music as an index of the person, which is what they're more interested in than anything. Taylor the person instead of Taylor the artist. And I think both Miyazaki and Taylor have, if not exactly bought into their own hype and what people have made of their work, they've definitely started listening way too much to what people are saying, and paying way too much attention to what is going on Twitch or on Twitter. Go back and play Bloodborne. There is not an inch of real estate in that game that is wasted, that has not been lovingly crafted in accordance with a very idiosyncratic vision that Miyazaki had. Go back and listen to 1989. There is hardly a second of dead air on that album. It has an energy and a will to power and a will to expression in it that blows away anything in Taylor's last several albums. The Miyazaki who made Bloodborne evidently didn't give a shit what anybody thought, and the Miyazaki who made Elden Ring and the Elden Ring DLC very clearly does. Because if you look at how the difficulty is handled, it seems that he has leaned into the cult to some degree, or at least is willing to appease them, dealing with the fact that he's in this double bind where, on the one hand, literally everyone has to play the game, and on the other hand, it still has to be quote-unquote impossible, by artificially inflating difficulty and making bosses where the challenge lies not so much in the sophistication and brilliance of their design, but in the mere numbers that get slotted in for their HP and damage. The Taylor who made 1989 had a clear will and desire not to give a shit what anybody thought. Brilliantly exemplified by one of my favorite songs of hers, I Know Places, which is a beautiful and powerful song about wanting something just for you, and not for them. Love's a fragile little flame, it could burn out, she sings. And that flame needs to be protected not just because of what it means for her and in her life, but because of what it means for her art, which also could easily be blown out by the wind of rumor. For Taylor, being in love, falling in and out of love, and creating art are almost identical. They're completely mutually dependent on one another. And the song is framed perfectly by the click of a tape recorder being turned on and turned off. The song itself is sort of bracketed, and bracketed by the sound of something being recorded personally and not in a studio. It has to be hers before it becomes anybody else's. And it's also bracketed, fitting in with the same idea, by her repetition of one word. I. The self that needs to be preserved in the face of public scrutiny. So while on Tortured Poets Department, she addresses her fans plenty and addresses the public, she's completely incapable of getting over and beyond them. And I think the impulse and volition captured in a song like I Know Places is just gone. I don't know that Taylor exists anymore. And I wish she did because I want more of that kind of music.